Hello, everyone. I'm Nellie Szilagyi-Benedek, Deputy Director for Education and Programs here at the Jewish Museum. Welcome to our Director's Talk series featuring James S. Snyder, Helen Goldsmith Menschel Director, in conversation with artists, authors, and other cultural leaders and thinkers, exploring the role and relevance of art in this moment. These talks offer a forum for dialogue and discourse for public audiences of diverse backgrounds and perspectives, all of whom nonetheless embrace the Jewish Museum setting as a venue for learning and engagement. The director's talks are part of the Morris W. Offit Lecture Series made possible by the Jack, Joseph, and Morton Mandel Foundation. We are extremely grateful for the support. Tonight, James Snyder will be in conversation with Deborah Kass. Deborah Kass is an artist whose work examines the intersection of art history, popular culture, and the self. Her work is in the collections of the Met, MoMA, the Whitney, the Guggenheim, the Jewish Museum, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, as well as numerous other museums and private collections. Her work has been shown nationally and internationally. The Andy Warhol Museum presented Deborah Kass Before and Happily Ever After Mid-Career Retrospective in 2012 with a catalog published by Rizzoli. Her sculpture, Oi Yo, is permanently installed in front of the Brooklyn Museum, the Cantor Arts Center at Stanford University, and the Weitzman Museum of American Jewish History in Philadelphia. And of course, we also own a version. Deborah Kass has served on the board of the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts and currently serves on the board of the Sharpe Walentis Studio Program. She currently has an exhibition, The Art History Paintings, 1989 to 1992, at Salon 94, just a few blocks away. When you see that exhibition, which also includes the painting in our collection, Subject Matters, I think you will be struck by how relevant her imagery is for today's fraught times. The issues raised by Deborah Kass's work, issues relating to identity, stereotypes, and power structures, continue to unsettle and provoke. What I love most about Deborah Kass, the artist, is how unapologetic she is. She has a what you see is what you see attitude that challenges you to confront the forces that manipulate our world and our experiences. We are so pleased to welcome Deborah Kass to tonight's conversation. I would remind everyone to please turn off your cell phones and refrain from recording during tonight's program. And now join me in welcoming our speakers, James Snyder and Deborah Kass.
Before we say anything else, we have to thank Nellie Benedek. Nellie has been orchestrating this series of director's talks, which many of you know we started after October 7 a year ago. I'll say a bit more about why, but she really does a wonderful job doing so. And stand up so we can just applaud you. Applaud you and your team for the great job you do with this series. And it's always heartening to have a room full of guests. Really, we do this 2 or 3 times a week, and for us, it gives credibility to the vitality of this place and to what we are able to do in times as challenging as these times continue to be. So, with that, it's a pleasure to be here with Deb Kass. And actually, she and I have had a great time just thinking through what the message of this evening might be about. And frankly, for me, it fits very well into what this whole series has been about. The series we did start last year after October 7. It has been part of our action plan in response to October 7 and to the events that continue to unfold since then, and which, alas, are as complex now, if not more complex than they were over a year ago. These talks continue to have great meaning for us. This is why we continue them. And you know, those of you who follow us know that we continue to assert a message about the importance of the restoration of humanism, that museums, this museum and all other museums exist because we are custodians of the legacy of cultural heritage worldwide. Without humanism, you don't have that kind of legacy. And going forward, you will have very little to add to that narrative. We really feel that we need to be about engagement, about enlightenment, We need to be a model for what we can call in a positive way cultural activism or cultural diplomacy as a way to get to a brighter time than we are in today. I speak often about how the pandemic these days is one of xenophobia, ignorance, political polarization, all of which want to overtake us, and we really need to be the counterpoint to all of that. The point of this series is to talk to creative thinkers of all kinds in the arts, but also writers, educators, religious figures, looking at the times not politically, but through a cultural lens. And to do so continues to carry great meaning. To do so this evening with Deb, where visual art is our point of focus, could not be more important, could not be more timely. There is also special timeliness to our doing our talk right now. I have a feeling, because so many of you are friends of Deb, I have a feeling you've all been to Salon 94 to see her current exhibition of her art history paintings from 1989 to 1992. If you haven't, run, don't walk, because you've got only 3 or 4 more days before it closes. What's really great about going to see them is that they're from that moment, and they were really from their moment. I think Deb was in her mid-30s when she made them, and they are as much of the moment today as they were 30 years ago. And we're actually going to begin by looking at some of the images from that installation as a way just to begin our conversation together. And let's see how we can do this. You know, before we begin, actually, when Nellie started, I thought I should get up and the first thing I should say is oi. And you know, we're all saying oi all the time these days. And if you want to talk about the timeliness of Deb's work, when she made it and today, if you want a word, if you want a 2-letter word, it's probably oi. Anyway, we're starting there. Just a few images, which I will move along, and then Deb, perhaps you'll say something about what it's like to see these images now and to look at how at that moment you were asserting your point of view about the history of art or the history of modern art. And here you're seeing examples. Here you're seeing the women who sort of overtook, in the case of Gertrude Stein, the men who overtook, the case of Cézanne. And just say something about this.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you everyone for coming, especially all of my many friends here. And thank you, James, for having me. This is great. These paintings from 1989 to 92 were really about sort of deconstructing how power is sort of inscribed in the histories of art, particularly in modernist history. And that power is a particularly masculinist power. Since when I was a kid, the only artists you saw at MoMA, or I saw at MoMA, or the Met growing up, were all men. And I used to sort of walk around kind of wondering what it all had to do with me, but kind of falling in love with them at the same time. So these are both a sort of love letter and complete critical deconstruction of art history as I learned it.
You know, it's amazing to hear you say what you just said. If you all go downstairs, and again, run, don't walk, to see our exhibition of Trenton Doyle Hancock in visual conversation with Philip Guston, that show also closes in about 4 days. And when you go to see it, you realize that everyone, each person's personality is both sides of the story, love and hate. You can be like a black man and a racist. You can be a Jew and an anti-Semite. And when you just said what you said, it resonated for me with that perspective. And we will get there. I want you to say another word, though,
Right.
about subject matters from 1989. The one work from the original exhibition of these works that was sold, and of course it was sold to the Jewish Museum and Norman Klebat, who was then our senior curator who is sitting here is the one who acquired it. Thank you, Norman.
I did remember there was a second sale.
You told me this was
FYI.
the only one.
I thought
Okay.
it was, and then Patty reminded me, didn't you sell another one? I did sell another one to Sam Hunter, and he was collecting for Commodities Corporation. The reason I forgot is the painting's lost because they got, I mean, we're going to try to track it down, but it got, Commodities got bought by Goldman Sachs. So somewhere in their collection is this other painting, and I completely forgot about it.
Okay, it's the one surviving
It's the
painting sold from that
surviving painting.
exhibition.
But this, I don't know if this began my friendship with Norman or this was sort of in the beginning of our very long friendship, in which we, that kind of started over both of our, well, let me talk about the painting first. The painting is called Subject Matters, 8990, and in it you can see a sort of stacked Lucy bodies from Peanuts, a capital I that is sort of generic medieval manuscript idea, but capital I because who's this subject is me. And then the blue section is a quote from a Jasper John sculpture actually called The Critic Sees. So I don't know if you can see it. Going the wrong way. Oh yeah, you can see it. There's lips and teeth in the speaking, you know, in the eyeglasses instead of eyes. And the bottom image is of Auschwitz, the pile of glasses. And given your current exhibition, it is consciously with Rembrandt lighting. So, and this painting was about who's the subject, who's the object, what is objectification, what does it mean to be the speaking subject. So Norman and I became friends at this point when multiculturalism was a new phenomena, sort of in the intellect. It wasn't new, but it was coalescing. It was really an outgrowth of all the rights movements of the 60s, coalescing into a very interesting and very dynamic set of concerns. And in this conversation about multiculturalism, which involved, it was the time of ACT UP, so a lot of queer theory, feminist literary criticism, feminist art history, all these canons were being rewritten. Critical race theory, which back then very few white people talked about, but was a legal theory taught in law schools that basically described how racism is inscribed in our legal system. And I was thinking, how is sexism inscribed in how we learn about art and what we learn about great art and what is great art and who is great art and who is great artists. So Norman and I were both very focused on the fact that queer as we both were, feminist as we both were, there was something missing in this discourse. And what was missing was, where are the Jews? Where are we, those of us born right after the liberation of Auschwitz, where are we in this conversation? Where is the analysis of structural anti-Semitism? Anyway, so that's what the painting's about.
Not anyway, but you're laying the ground for all the questions that are now going to come to you.
Good, because I read them first.
Well, that's because it's fair to let you read them first. But
You have to
here,
be
you know
prepared.
what, it's really, look, here is subject matters in the context of the collection here. And it's actually very nice to see it not standing apart, but in a setting like this. If you want to say something, seeing it here, do so, and then we'll move on.
I think I liberated the Jew in Ross Bleckner.
All right, we're going to get to that too.
I think I did
Now, we're going to get to that too. And this really is just a segue to your story. And what I like to do is have people go back to where their story began. And it's really interesting. I think you're going to love this. You know, I know Deb, I know her work, I have followed her for all these years, but I just kind of opened Wikipedia to get the details from the beginning, and there's like this amazing, this is a sidebar, but it's the resonance between us. Okay, we were both born in 1952. Both our dads were in the Air Force in San Antonio. Deb went to Carnegie Mellon, a few blocks from where my parents spent the last 35 years of their lives. And when, actually, it was in Wikipedia as well, but Deb says that her real focus, what galvanized her focus on visual art as a way to communicate her sensibility going forward, was from seeing the Frank Stella exhibition in 1969 at MoMA, which was a really transformative moment at MoMA. I only arrived there 5 years later, but I benefited from being mentored for 20 years thereafter by Bill Rubin, for whom Frank Stella was the only then contemporary artist for whom he had any interest or enthusiasm. So we are connected. I mean, it's amazingly resonant that we're connected this way. It's like we were separated at birth, and we do both wear glasses, and we do both have graying hair. Although I think for me, it's a past tense grade. For you, not yet there.
I'm on my way.
But let's talk about in the beginning. You know, Deb was born in San Antonio. I wasn't. I was born at McGee Women's Hospital in Pittsburgh. But she then did move in this direction, got to Long Island, and even though she's from another planet, she talks about herself as a dyed-in-the-wool New Yorker. And when we discussed that, for me it was like, is that your identity, or are you searching for your identity? And how does art connect with that? And you've already talked about being a feminist and being an artist, and sort of taking ownership of 100+ years of modern art history to look for the place of women in that story. And the question is, and I know the answer, clearly for these last many years, you're like the right artist at the right time to look at all of that from the 80s to the present. So say something about that.
What was the question? I'm very literal. I need you to actually ask me one thing, and then I will go off.
How could it be from getting born in San Antonio,
okay,
did you come to this awakening beyond Frank Stella that really created the platform for this work for from the last 30 years?
Well, because, okay, I was only in San Antonio for 6 months. And then my parents moved back home, which was for my father, Queens, for my mother, the Bronx, and they moved to Long Island. So when I say I'm a dyed-in-the-wool New Yorker, I was just very exotic in my elementary school, having been born not in Oceanside.
Did you feel like a stranger in a strange land then?
No. I was a happy little kid who drew a lot. No, nothing about Texas had anything to do with my conscious life. Everything about Long Island did. So, art. So I was always going to be an artist. I don't know why. I knew it from when I was really, if you asked me at 5, what do you want to be when you grow up, I would have told you I wanted to be an artist. And I just was one of those kids that drew on everything, like the walls of my parents' house. And, you know, they sent me to nursery school way too early, I think because my sister was just born or something. So I was like pre-verbal, but I do remember, for instance, stealing the big fat crayons from nursery school. Like, this is what I hate to say I was born to do it, because it's been really hard, but it is like, I was always going to be an artist. I had a few lapses along the way, but they were short-lived.
Well, so it was intuitive for you that
Yeah,
your
totally.
form of expression was going to be to take those fat crayons
Exactly.
and start drawing with them, and later start painting.
Correct.
And later using all kinds of other mediums to express your work.
Mainly, I've always been a painter. I mean, I really, it was, that was never really a question. I mean, I made a sculpture once, that one. And,
It's coming, don't worry.
yeah, I made a sculpture once, and I always say this, painters can do anything. You know, sculptors really, no offense, some can make paintings, but photographers definitely can't make paintings or sculptures. But, but painters can do a lot of things. And I just got really lucky with that sculpture. So we'll talk about it.
That's coming.
Yeah, so the Frank Stella thing, the art thing, so I don't know, I started going to the Art Students League the minute, parents then were different. They didn't really care what you did. So I started going into Manhattan, I don't know, about like 14, and going to the Art Students League. And they were not supportive, unlike, the younger generation of parents who everything's great. And I paid with babysitting money, and I went to the Art Students League because I was reading books I read, I would like haunt MoMA bookstore along with MoMA, and I would pick up books that I didn't know what they were, but a few of them mentioned Art Students League. So, I went to the Art Students League. My friend actually took me. We went together. And that was it. I went to Carnegie because the same friend I went to the Art Students League with went to RISD, and I thought we shouldn't go to the same place. And Carnegie was the only other art school I actually knew about because of Andy Warhol. And so I applied to Carnegie just because I didn't know about School of Visual Arts. Had I known, I probably would have really wanted to go there. But the guidance counselors didn't know about that either, I guess. They only knew about Carnegie and RISD.
Well, you did fine. I'm going to show somehow you are well identified with your images of Barbara. And we lucked out at this museum. I think, Norman, you had a fair amount to do with this. These are works from our collection that are really iconic for us. And they are you, and they are you connecting with this imagery of Barbara and with the personality of Barbara and this whole notion of being assertive about where women fit into this picture. And you all know, I hope, that we're reinventing our third and fourth floors to show our collections in new and different ways. And when we dismantled, we did an installation mixing up work from across the collections, and they were like greatest hits. And here you see, in this image, you see the Yentls here, which really are iconic for us in the collection. What was the fixation, I won't call it an obsession, with Barbara? And how did it came out with such profound success, actually? They were embraced instantly when they came out. Talk about why you made them, how you made them, how you feel about them now.
I love them.
As we do.
Okay, well, if you see my show at Salon 94, it's work from 89 to 92, and in 92, as I was still making that work, well, let's just start with this. I really painted through every idea. Not every idea I ever had, but every painting made another painting, another idea. And when I was like third year into my art history paintings, which I should also mention, I showed with Simon Watson, who is in the audience, and he will come back into the story shortly. That work, the art history paintings, had a lot to do with my absence, and I really started to wonder about my presence. And when I was thinking about that, I had a conversation with a friend, and I was saying to this friend, every single thing a man does about his adolescence you find fascinating. It doesn't matter what it is, you just think it's great, whatever it is. And he said, well, I'd love to know what do girls think about in their adolescence. So that was really working on me. At the same time, I was kind of trying to imagine, what's my presence? What does my presence look like? Well, when I was about 12, I got the Broadway bug and started reading. Maybe 13, I became aware of this girl named Barbra Streisand who'd taken Broadway by storm. And I grew up in a house of nostalgia. My father was a great jazz aficionado, so I grew up with fantastic music. My mother was a great movie aficionado, so I loved old movies. And when I got a load of Barbara the first time, I realized she looked like people I knew. And I had never seen a star look like people I knew, like I could have gone to camp with her. And it kind of blew my mind. And then I got obsessed with Barbara because I wanted to be Barbara. And I wanted to be that person. I've had this thing, I'm going to get it wrong, but I've had this thing in my studio forever. And it just says MGM mogul. And it's like, she wants to do her own hair. She wants to be her own director. She wants to do her own makeup. And you let her have it. You let Brando do it, and you let Streisand do it. And the whole shtick with Barbara, when she was coming out on Life magazine, et cetera, was that she knew who she was. And she understood the power of her difference. She understood the glamour. She was a feminist sort of right before feminism, and she was really famous for this right away. I mean, they gave her creative control over those CBS TV specials when she was 22. So she was really a genius. And I was 10 years younger, I was 12, going, who is this creature and how can I be just like her? So that was where it sort of dovetailed with this idea of my presence and what did I think about as an adolescent. And I thought a lot about my ambition as an adolescent. And here was this incredibly unapologetically Jewish, ambitious, talented girl with chutzpah. And I just wanted to be her. So I started making these silk screens. A friend taught me one weekend. Literally, I went to her loft. She showed me how to silk screen. I had this thing made. I found the image. There used to be like memorabilia stores with movie posters and stills and stuff, and I found that image. She told me where to take it to get a shot and put on a silk screen, and I learned how to do the silk screen, and I did them. I did many backgrounds over one weekend, and I called my friend Simon Watson. I said, Simon, I think you need to come over. And he came over. He was like, I want to show these. And I'll tell you one reason they were so popular. He says, I want to show them. I said, how much do you think they should be? And he said, I don't know, like 1,000, 2,000. I said, how about 450 and 600? And Simon, where are you? We sold like,
I was going to say,
right?
sold.
Sold like crazy. Anyway, but for the next version of this show, which was with another art dealer named Jose Freire at Fiction Nonfiction was the gallery. Oh, when I made these Barbara paintings, I was thinking among all those other things was, I'm making something about multicultural for a whole group of people who don't know what that is. Older Jewish women and gay men. And I knew it. But when it came to do the next show, like 6 months later, I was like, it can't just be a tchotchke. It can't just be cute. It is more meaningful than that. And like I had the idea for Barbara with the first Barbara's, the names. In my head, I had the name, and it was the Jewish Jackie series before I made the thing. And for the Yentls, I had the name, it was My Elvis. And I went back to those stores, and I found the perfect image on the back of the Laserdisc album for Yentl. And it got more serious with Yentl. It was about drag. It was about women's education. It was about limitations and getting past limitations. It was about transforming yourself to get what you want and get what you need, and the passion of, and it also felt like a perfect metaphor for what I was doing, but also being a woman artist, which was Yentl. I know everyone in this audience knows what I'm going to do a little shorthand. But it's the story of a girl who dresses like a boy so she can study sacred texts which are not allowed by custom and law. This felt exactly like being a woman artist. So it had another resonance, had many more resonances than just the Barbers.
You know, it's really interesting. These are very powerful pictures. When you talk about Barbara, what I think about is how she exploited multiple identities. And we're actually, Darcy Alexander, our chief curator, is percolating an idea about an exhibition about Barbara here in a couple of years' time. And it will be about this multitude of identities, whereas for you it was about an assertive identity, a single identity, and you drew it from the inspiration of all of her identities. And I'm going to move us to Blue Deb, because I want you to continue what you were saying, looking at Blue Deb and talking about it, because this is you. This
Right.
be you.
Well, there was time to, this is at the end of an 8-year project called the Warhol Project, in which I substituted many other people. Barbara and Yentl were for a certain, I didn't know what I didn't know it would become the Warhol Project, but basically I collaborated, and I want to talk about Trent when we talk, I could do it now. At the time, Trent was my student at Skowhegan in 1997. I was right in the middle of the Warhol Project. And the Warhol Project was my 8-year relationship, and I call it marriage, to Andy Warhol. I had an ongoing dialogue in my head with Andy Warhol. That's why my retrospective was at the Warhol Museum. That's probably why I was on the board of the Warhol Foundation. Like, the Warhol people really embraced this. And early on, and people you will know, like Roberta Bernstein, came to my studio with the Barbers first and went, Andy would love this. Robert Rosenblum said the exact same thing. But my relationship to Andy was a serious commitment for many years, and I used his images of Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, which is the Rauschenberg family, and I did Gertrude and Alice, Gertrude Stein's family. I really substituted a lot of different things. I did Linda Nochlin as Orange, what is it called? Thank you, Orange Disaster. Right, I made like a 10 by 12 foot portrait of Linda as Orange Disaster. So I substitute a lot. And this is the last, this is the last official image I did of that Warhol project in 2000, so it was an 8-year project. And, it's me as a nice Jewish lady, Liz Taylor. And my friend who's older than me said the cutest thing when she saw these first. She said, we all wanted to be Liz Taylor. And I was Liz Taylor.
So that's sort of more about the ambiguity of identity, but what it does, it takes me to the next question, which is a critical question here, relating to the times we're in, but also relating to the heritage of many of us. It's the question about your Judaism. And when we were preparing for this talk and we talked about it, and you brought up the Jewish Museum exhibition from 1996, Too Jewish. And here's yet another one of these resonances. And I said, of course, we had just moved to Israel that year, but we were here, we saw the exhibition, and my wife Tina's nose was in it because she was part of Dennis Carden's series of Jewish noses. And of course, what did Deb tell me? She was the first of those noses. So she and Tina were together in that composition, which I think is here in the collection now, right?
I've liberated many Jews.
And so Tina is here this evening. If Tina were to stand up, which she won't, you'll see that she and Deb also are addicted to blue and white horizontal stripes, which each of them wears all the time.
Correct.
And it's part of this resonant heritage. But it brings me, where I want us to go is to the issue of you and Judaism, your identity, your Jewish identity. And you've been talking about it peripherally, but let's make it the thread of the next part of the conversation and come up to you know, from the start of your time to October 7, a year and a half ago. And then we're going to talk about more recently.
That's such a big question. So, you know, I guess I should talk about it in terms of my work. And you saw the painting. I mean, you guys have Subject Matters, which was the first time, based on what I was saying before, where Norman and Maurice Berger and I were in a conversation about where are the Jews in this big thing that we love, you know, that is so interesting, multiculturalism, and are being missing. We're just missing. So I've sort of made a point of, I mean, the word intersectional hadn't happened yet, but I don't think there's a thing I've made that isn't, starting with the art history paintings. And so including, I mean, I did an entire series of paintings called Feel Good Paintings for Feel Bad Times that's basically lyrics by Jews throughout, well, mainly Broadway, but also popular culture, popular songs and stuff like that. And there's always this sort of Yiddishkeit thing going on in my work, that it's just one of the threads as much as queerness and white girlness.
Okay, but we're moving to this image,
Right.
Hard to be a Jew.
And this is from Feel Good Paintings for Feel Good
right.
Times. And this is the only, I kind of stuck this slide in because otherwise there would have been like 20 years between the Barbaras and the Oyo. But this project lasted a very long time, and if it wasn't a Broadway song, in this case, it's Yiddish for "It's hard to be a Jew." And I specifically, I thought it was interesting to show with Trent and the Guston, the relationship with Guston, of course, being such a significant Jewish artist with such significant Jewish content. And it's my little tribute to Guston, and it's quite big. And the background is, I thought, a kind of Goyisha madras. And that's why it's Goyisha green.
You mean
And
Goyish designer bed sheets?
now, but I thought more of shorts. And country clubs. So that's that. And so it's a thread that I've just carried through along with all my other threads. I've made a point of it. I mean, I've used Gertrude Stein, for instance, since that painting that's in the show. I mean, everything started with the art history paintings. But I've made a point, for instance, of always referring to Gertrude Stein in whatever series I do, in any style I'm using, just to keep the thread going. And we didn't talk about that painting in particular, but in my show at Salon, there's a painting of mine called How Do I Look? And in it, I have copied Picasso's Stein. Mm-hmm. And before Barbra Streisand, for me, there was Gertrude Stein. And that was when I was a little kid with my father going to the Met, and I saw this particular painting of a lady who didn't look like the other ladies at the Met. She didn't look like a Mary Magdalene. She didn't look like softcore porn. She looked like my grandmother. And I was completely stunned, and I stopped in my tracks, and I still remember vividly that aesthetic emotion I experienced because I could identify with that person. Now, did I know she was a lesbian? Did I know she was Jewish? No. I knew she reminded me of my grandma's, but that was, so I've carried that through as a thread too. Did that answer any question?
Well, it did, but we're going to stay with it because it's like there's a struggle. You know, when we said before, let's go to the show downstairs, Guston's work, it's like, am I a Jew or an anti-Semite? Or Trenton's work, am I a black man or a racist? And, you know, an assertion like this in this painting, it's the same thing. You've talked about how Jewish identity is part of your core, but it's the same time, it's about how you dress it up, as Barbra Streisand did, so that it either represents or parodies other cultures. So there's like this resonance or this juxtaposition of opposing points of view, and it's in your work, and you're saying it here. Being Jewish has meant a lot to you in the work, and yet it's not about being Jewish, but it's there.
Sometimes it's about it, and sometimes it's just there.
Well then, so let's go to Oi Yo, because it really does speak to
Right
this.
there.
Yep, there it is. Big time.
Well, okay, so I made this, first of all, these started as paintings based on Ed Ruscha's Oof,
Which is at MoMA.
which is at MoMA, and it was just, a visit to MoMA, standing in front of that painting, and I just thought, oi, simple. So I painted it, just like Ruscha, and then caught a glimpse of it in a window where it said, yo. So the paintings were 2010, and about 2012, I got the opportunity to make well, there's one actually in the shop. That's from the original, that's the original Oyo sculpture. And I think that was 2011. And we made it, it's there. You could see it through the window. And what happened is a few years later, 2015, I guess, I had the opportunity to do a big public sculpture. And it was an opportunity. Women really hadn't done a lot of public sculpture at that point. There's been a ton since, but at that point, no. And do you have a question? You look like you want to ask something.
I do, because the public sculpture side, it's
Right.
like the work has one meaning when you look at it in a museum gallery setting, and it has another meaning when you look at it as a public sculpture.
Well, the opportunity to make a public sculpture was really exciting. And it was also during Hamilton. And I think first of all, everything's different when it's big. I mean, once it was installed, it was a completely different experience than 10 inches by 20. And even 3 foot by 6, which didn't happen yet. It was to go from 10 inches by 20 inches to 8 feet by 16 and a half feet is a completely different thing. And this is where opportunity means everything. And once it was installed at the Brooklyn Bridge Park, and the question was how to face it, where to say oi and where to say yo. So we figured that out. That was easy. But once it was installed, I literally texted my wife, Patty, over there, and I said, instant icon. Because it was a no-brainer. I mean, this isn't it's not even an opinion. It was so clear. It was so clear. When you make something 8 feet by 16, it tends to be important. It definitely is more important than 10 inches by 20. And and the fact that it was monumental, the fact that I had the opportunity to speak to so many communities with this piece, and it wouldn't mean that when it was sitting on your coffee table. It means that when it's in a park. It means that when it's public. And again, it's a resonance I wasn't expecting, but it's a monumental work of art that, given where it's been placed, speaks to so many communities. And this is where I say it was my Hamilton piece. And I never expected to make a popular work of art. I really didn't. It was never in my mind on the agenda or anything, but it was. And it also ended up, art's funny. You make something and all these things reveal itself to you. And this piece, the minute it was installed, I'm like, this is about democracy. And I hadn't planned on making a piece about democracy other than all my work deals with representation. We live in a representative democracy. I think it's really important to represent. But this was on another level, and this was about community and communities. And that's, and it's really Jewish.
Well, well, it's both things.
But it's also really working class white people and black people and Spanish people, because I took Spanish, and Picasso has really famous Yo Picasso painting. So it really is just resonate in this way. I felt like it was totally beschert, and I was lucky.
And you know, it's a perfect example of how art can offer the opportunity to a pathway to a brighter time ahead. You know, if you want to be well, look, if you want to be simple about it, different kinds of people see it and read it with the same powerful meaning. If you want to be sociological, it's like cross-communal engagement through a work of art. What I find fascinating is that you think about it in one way when you see it in an art museum gallery setting, and you think about it in a much more liberated way when you see it outdoors like this. What you just described, which can bring tears to one's eyes, is because of what it means when you see it in a setting like that.
Right, and I have to say, when it was in Dumbo, which is where it was first on the waterfront, in Brooklyn Bridge Park, and it said, Yo faced Brooklyn and Oi faced Manhattan. Every time I visited, there was a wedding, professional wedding shots being done, or a reunion, or a class photo, or it was there were Indian, like from Queens. Oh, I remember this day, and they were all wearing aqua. The whole wedding party was like posed in front of this. Another time, there were a group of Hasidic girls, and it was summer camp, and they were like fourth graders, and their teacher, who probably was 17, she said, I know what oi, and they were from Crown Heights, okay? I know what oi means, but what does yo mean? And like she really didn't know, but everybody kind of involved with it and around it and taking pictures felt like it was theirs.
You know, this is a video project that needs to be in your future, because it really does speak to this point of how a work of art can have this kind of meaning that takes you to coming together rather than pulling apart. And that actually brings, it's a fast forward almost to the moment. So almost a year ago, it was May last year, when the Brooklyn Museum was vandalized, and when Oi Yo was vandalized outside at the Brooklyn Museum. How did you feel? What was your response to that?
All right, my response is probably not what you're going to expect. One thing is, it already needed a paint job. It was overdue.
Pragmatism wins often. Good
So-
for you. That's very healthy. I like that response.
I want to say something, but I'm not going to, about healthy. All right, but I won't. Okay, so, I think Ann wrote, I can't remember, I think Ann wrote me and said, just so Sharon, the deputy director, just so you know, there's been some damage, whatever. I came by the next day to see it, and it was much more damaged than I imagined. And she didn't know because someone had reported to her, and she wasn't in town either, so she didn't really see the extent. And I kind of checked it for scratches, because they would be a problem if it was incised in some deep way. But other than the wear and tear and chips that already needed a paint job, it was head to toe covered. There's another really healthy thing I'm going to say. I didn't own it anymore. It needed a paint job. I'm just like, well, you need a paint job anyway. But basically, they cleaned it. They have not done the paint job yet. They did a nice job cleaning it. I did not for 1 second experience this as anti-Semitism. I am completely focused and have been on anti-Semitism since before October 7th, since Trump. And in fact, I was asked to write something about it in Hyperallergic a year before October 7th. And at that point already, the question in my piece was, well, I started it saying, we knew it could happen here, but we never thought it would. And I don't remember exactly the next line, but it's something to the effect of, For us, America was the promised land. And so I have been very focused on anti-Semitism, and I personally didn't think this was anti-Semitism. I think if Indiana's love had been on the plaza, it would have gotten just as tagged, just as messed up. I do think when the next step was bombing Ann Pasternak's apartment building and 3 trustees who they say were not Jewish, but they were, I think that was anti-Semitism. So that's how I felt about it. It still needs a paint job. That's what I still think.
Well, look, your personal response is part of this point of how art can help find a path to a brighter time ahead on that front. But the other point, and really we'll wrap up with this, is has what has happened, not what happened to Oyo, but what has happened in the last 18 months, has it changed your sense, your own sense of your Jewish identity, or your own sensitivity about anti-Semitism?
Yeah.
You've already responded to that.
Well, I have another response, which is it's been the rise in anti-Semitism before and after. Of course, it's gotten completely acute, even more, I'm sorry, but you're from Pittsburgh. Tree of Life Synagogue did it for me. You know, I was ready to pack a bag then. And Tree of Life Synagogue's in Squirrel Hill. It's a lovely synagogue. It's historic. And when 11 Jews were gunned down, that's when it got to me. So I think that the lack of education in the past 30 years about anti-Semitism and structural anti-Semitism in the way we've studied post-colonial theory, structural racism, structural sexism, structural homophobia, we missed structural anti-Semitism, and I think we're living with the result of that.
And you know, part of our action plan is exactly to have conversations like this that surface those challenges going forward. And we're doing this with our staff, we're doing it in public talks like this, we're doing it by providing artists with opportunities to show work here that are responding to the trauma that we're experiencing in these times. And again, our point is to look at the way that there is this pandemic of racism, of xenophobia, of ignorance, and trying to find pathways for engagement rather than polarization. And my related last question for you is, where do you see this might take your work in ways where it hasn't gone before?
I have no idea. And I'd be lying if I said I knew. But I want to say one more thing about anti-Semitism, that till Donald Trump, the only anti-Semitism I've experienced has been internalized anti-Semitism. Okay? So when the Barbra Streisand paintings happened, and this was part of Norman's thinking about Too Jewish, right? I was much younger, and the collecting class was much older, and they were our parents' ages. They grew up in the 40s, and they grew up with a kind of fear about being Jewish, even though I grew up, which we didn't talk about, in an extremely Jewish neighborhood. I never, like I said, went to summer camp, went to kosher camp, never learned a word of Hebrew, don't get me wrong. But
Don't worry, I didn't either.
oh, good. And I never experienced any anti-Semitism in my entire life until the vibe changed with Donald Trump, until Charlottesville, until it became like acceptable in my lifetime. So, and I was going to say about our parents and the people who were kind of in charge of the art world then. They were paranoid, they were scared. I do not blame them. They grew up in World War II and with the Holocaust. And they were the ones who said, when they saw the Barbra Streisand paintings, too Jewish. They were the ones who came to Too Jewish and said, too Jewish. And this was what we were dealing with and trying to deal with. And I thought Barbra Streisand cured it, by the way. I thought, like, in 1963, everybody was going to be really proud to be a Jew because of Barbra Streisand. So I don't know how it's going to affect my work going forward at all. I mean, anti-Semitism and fascism, like, there's a lot that's going to be affecting all of us.
And you're right to highlight that as we conclude. And, you know, it also brings us back to downstairs and Guston thinking about, am I a Jew or an anti-Semite? And, you know, we have this, it's internalized, but you are speaking with a lot of clarity about where we are at the moment. You know, right after October 7, 2 months after, we brought Zoya Cherkassky's drawings of October 7. And I sat here for a conversation with her, and I said, how will the trauma of this moment change your work? And she said, it's too early to tell. If you had said otherwise, it would have been disingenuous, because it's going to roll out from here going forward. And we'll be eager to see how it rolls out with you and your work. And, you know, in a way, Oyo, the optimism of Oyo is not with us at the moment.
Right.
So the question is, where will we go? And we're all going to be eager to see where you take us. So thank you for having this conversation.
Thank you for inviting me.